You had a preview of Pamela Marrone. Pamela Marrone, come and stand here at the podium because she is so involved in this topic.
Yes, I'm not going to speak from there, but yeah, that's okay.
We'll stand there first of all so people can stare at what the CEO of Bioinnovations Inc. USA looks like. You're so involved. Today is all about alternative products. And so Pam, I noticed, was making notes as Professor Hofter was speaking. But what Pam is going to talk to you about are natural methods of pest control, which is a conversation that came up in the plenary yesterday, and that was quite a heated conversation. And then Pam is going to take us a little bit further and deeper into that topic. Good morning. Looking forward to your keynote.
Good morning. I really enjoyed Dr. Hofte's speech. It was an excellent way you can go out to nature and look for these things. And I'm going to take it up a level and talk bigger picture and more about the commercial aspects. But we are a public company, so the lawyers require me to put this up here. What this means is, if I make any forward-looking statements, they may not be reliable, and therefore do not trade stock on that. So, how did I get into this? Well, actually, more than 50 years ago, my father was worried about the gypsy moths that were eating the various trees, especially the dogwood tree, which is still there outside the kitchen window on this lovely 20-acre place where my mother, age 92, still is. And I got into the natural world from the pond that we built and the vegetable garden that is still there, and I actually fly all the way from California to do for my mom. But my father used carbaryl for spraying the dogwood tree when he thought he was going to lose the dogwood tree because of the gypsy moths. And my mom dragged me out and said, look what your father did, and he killed all the bees and the lady beetles and the lacewings on the tree as well. And she banned him from using another chemical of that sort. So he went back to the farm store and found BT. That many years ago, the first ever commercialized biopesticide. And he sprayed it, and he sprayed some hemlocks and also the dogwood trees. And I said, so Dad, how did it work? And he said, well, it's good for the environment, makes your mother happy, but I am not sure it works. That is the story of my career. I was determined for 30 years to find products that work. But it is not necessarily do they work, it's how to make them work. But before I talk about that, for those of you who are students or young people in the audience, or even if you're not that young, this is the time to start up a company. It is the golden age of entrepreneurship in agriculture. There is so much money, actually last year, $12 billion flowed into startup companies doing ag tech from farm to fork. So gene-edited crops or improved crop varieties of all sorts, whether it's gene editing or GMO or what have you, companies doing that. Companies like input companies, which I'll describe, like mine or others, with making biopesticides or biostimulants, precision farming tools, robots for weeding or for picking, and even cricket farming or black soldier fly farming, insect farming for food products as well as animal feed, and plant-based alternatives like Beyond Meat and Impossible Burger, where another 12 million has gone into those types. And so investors have found that they can make money on this sector. So if you are in graduate school and you want to start a company right out of graduate school, you can do it if you have a good idea. There's lots of incubators and lots of accelerators around and a lot of resources to help you. Or even if you don't want to start up a company but want to be part of a startup, it's an alternate career that you may not have considered in the past. So what are we talking about? Just some definitions for those of you who don't know. We're talking about biopesticides. Here in Europe, it's typically called biocontrol. In the US, it's called biopesticides because they are regulated by the Environmental Protection Agency in the Biopesticide Pollution Prevention Division. And then you have the biostimulant category, which are not for crop protection, but for increasing crop growth or plant yield. And these are more lightly regulated than the biopesticide category. Hence, most of the venture capital money and a lot of startups are going, and even big companies, are going into the biostimulant category because of the lower barriers to entry. However, there are new regulations afoot. Europe just passed, the Biostimulant Coalition lobbied hard and worked to get a regulatory framework, one common definition for biostimulants, That's in Europe now. The same thing happened in the US, where the US Farm Bill now defines biostimulants, but recently the Environmental Protection Agency put out a federal notice to regulate some aspects of biostimulants, which is causing quite a discussion in the industry. There's also some very interesting things going on in the biofertilizer category. A company called Pivot Bio, a startup in Berkeley, California, has some microorganisms that produce nitrogen that are helping monocots like corn grow without as much nitrogen fertilizer. Meanwhile, of course, you know that the large companies have merged with each others and have rearranged the deck chairs. So now we have Bayer purchasing Monsanto, Syngenta purchased by ChemChina, Dow and DuPont merged and spun off into Corteva, BASF, the beneficiary of those mergers, picking up a number of products. Likewise, FMC doing the same with getting some very good insecticidal chemistry. And then recently, UPL merged or bought Arista and became a very large player in this industry. The crop protection market is growing very slowly compared to the biologicals market. The biologicals market is growing double-digit rate. Now, one always assumes that the reason the biologicals market is growing so fast is because it's growing because of organic farming. Actually, 80% of all biologicals are used by conventional farmers. While organic is fast growing, consumers are driving the growth of organic food globally, conventional farmers are using biologicals more and more. Why is that the case? Well, I'll tell you that in a minute, but because of this growth, the big companies have all entered the biological space to varying degrees and have a play in biologicals. Because of that growth, the number one reason why farmers, conventional farmers, are using biologicals is because they see better return on investment, higher yields and quality when incorporated into crop production and pest management programs. It's because of dollars and cents. But then there's all these other reasons as well. Managing residues. You can spray right up to harvest and not worry about MRLs. You can harvest and go for export. You can spray in the morning and be back in the field in the afternoon, and this is important with very tight labor markets, especially like the labor markets we have in the United States, where farm labor is hard to get. The biologics are typically complex mode of action, so you can rotate or tank mix, use them in programs with chemical pesticides that are single site, and you can delay the development of resistance. Many farmers I talk to say, I've burned out my chemicals, so what do you have that can help me? And they're aware that there's sometimes that they use them too much and they have less efficacy than they did in the past. It costs much lower dollars to develop a biopesticide. There are implications to that I will talk about in a minute. And most biologicals have low risk to the environment, good pollinator safety, and safety to other organisms, and they're non-polluting. The products today are not the products they were 5 years ago or 5 years before that. There's so many times I'll hear, whether it's a farmer or a university scientist, oh, I tried that biological and it didn't work, I'm not interested. Well, when did you try it? Well, like, let's see, 1985. Well, you know, every minute of every day, the science is changing. There's so many tools of molecular biology, genomics, chemistry, fermentation, formulation, manufacturing that are applied now to today's modern biologicals. They're not the same products that they were in the past. So just a little bit about the company. This is the third company I started. My first one was in 1990. Was called Entotech, a subsidiary of Novo Nordisk. The second one was AgriQuest in 1995, and this one in 2006. So I started this one to rapidly get a pipeline of products that meet the full range of growers' needs. We have done that. We have about 110 employees, of which a third of them are in R&D. And we have each company that actually started my career at Monsanto, where I screened 150,000 microorganisms looking for natural products. That was before they got into GMOs, and then I was switched over into screening proteins to be able to engineer into plants. Of course, you know that story. But I went from 150,000 microbes at Monsanto to 55,000 microbes at Entotech to 22,000 microbes at AgriQuest and 18,000 microbes at Marrone Bio. So I'm assuming I'm getting better over time in being able to see patterns in nature and find these things more efficiently. We have a manufacturing facility in Bangor, Michigan, and I listed the company on NASDAQ in 2013. I don't necessarily recommend entrepreneurs to go on public markets. It's a brutal thing, but we are public and will continue to be so. And then everything we do and all of our product lines are patented. So you heard very nicely from our first speaker how you can go out to nature looking for suppressive soils or healthy plants in a diseased field and find interesting biocontrol organisms. We do the same, but the traditional natural products screening is now enabled by so many tools that we have. The molecular tools, the genomics tools, and along the whole way of discovery and development, we're able to use so many more powerful scientific tools than we have in the past, being able then to develop a product and optimize a product better than we have in the past. So for our company, we don't care where the discovery comes from. We have a mixture of products that are licensed from others, universities or US Department of Agriculture like Grandivo is, and then some from our own discoveries. So Regalia is an extract of giant knotweed. We actually bought the assets of a small company that was actually a discovery from Germany of knotweed extract being a good fungicide. And then we screened our whole collection looking for something that was very good against the oomycetes, and out of that came our products Amplitude and Stargus, Bacillus nakamuri. I think it's the first nakamuri commercialized. Grandivo is from a Chromobacterium subsugi strain, a new species that was discovered by the US Department of Agriculture from under a hemlock tree in Maryland. Venerate and Magistine insecticide nematicides and Zelto are from a new species of Burkholderia, which we named Rhinogensis, after the Rhinogen temple from the temple garden in Japan, where we found this bacterium. Haven is an extract of some various compounds from coconut oil that, when sprayed on the crop at bloom or there shortly after, or when the crop is rapidly growing, improves yield and quality by reducing stress in the plant. And then our non-ag product, Zequinox, we licensed this from some researchers in New York State. They found a Pseudomonas fluorescens strain from a mussel-infested river, and we've commercialized this as Zequinox. And you can inject pipes that have mussels, these invasive mussels. They're here in Europe. They came from Eastern Europe and have colonized Western Europe, US, Canada, and starting to go into Mexico. And they destroy freshwater ecosystems and clog up pipes. And this particular Pseudomonas produces a suite of proteins that bind to the gut of the mussel and kill the mussel. This particular species, Burkholderia rhinogensis strain A396, was discovered in our lab. And Ratnakar is going to be speaking on Thursday about the herbicidal aspects of this. He's our group leader of natural product chemistry, and he's been involved in this from the start with identifying the various compounds that you see here on the screen. And it is an amazing bacteria that produces herbicidal, insecticidal, and nematicidal compounds. And we can ferment this bacteria differently so that it produces the herbicidal compounds. Of course, you don't want herbicidal compounds in your insecticide or nematicide, so then we have a different fermentation to suppress the herbicidal compounds when fermenting for making either Venerate or Magistine for insecticide or nematicide. The area of seed treatment is the breakout area for biologicals. So the large acre crops, corn, soybeans, wheat, and cotton, have nearly all of them are treated with some combination of a biological plus a chemical coated around the seed. And so there's hundreds of millions of hectares being treated with stacked biologicals and chemicals. Our company has developed an all-biological stacked seed treatment, which includes a fungicidal microbe, an insecticidal nematicidal microbe, as well as a mycorrhizae from a small Israeli company called Groundwork Bioag. And it performed as well as any of the other commercial seed treatments. But this particular seed treatment is one of our microbes, the venerate microbes, in a brand called BioST, will be on about 5 million acres of corn and cotton and soybeans this year in the United States. And it is commercialized by Alba. And here's just some of the data showing that when adding this insecticidal nematicidal microbe to its chemicals, they also have a biostimulant, so it's a stacked of our microbe plus their chemicals plus a biostimulant. They can get some very, very nice data and showing an increase in yields with this seed treatment. So you're going to see this is a very active area with all the big companies in this with their own microbes or others' microbes, and so this will continue to be a very hot area. By way of illustration of how the modes of actions of these biologicals are so different, and in taking that into account when commercializing these and educating our customers, when we first launched Grandivo, we had a lot of complaints, and the grower said it wasn't working. Why? Because it's not a knockdown pesticide. It doesn't kill in 24 or 48 or even 72 hours. It is an anti-feedant. It stops feeding. It also stops reproduction, so it stops egg laying, and in aphids it will stop the babies from being popped out. And here's a picture on the right of the disruption of a larval leaf beetle, and so it causes a gut distress. And we believe that it's one of the compounds called chromamids, the chromamid group, a novel group of chemistry that Ratnakar discovered, showing that is responsible for the gut disruption. But there's also a number of proteins that we've discovered that synergize, and just like our previous speaker said, it's not just one thing doing one thing on the pest or pathogen. It's a cocktail. You have to look at the interactions of the various compounds. And in this case, the proteins synergize the chromamid by itself. It's maybe only 40% active, but then you add some of the proteins we've discovered to it, and it will boost it up to 90 or 100%. Meanwhile, we have these violacins, which are the purple pigments. This is a very beautiful purple lavender-colored bacteria. And those violacins are very important because they cause a repellency, and they also contribute to feeding cessation. But that repellency is a very interesting feature. In fact, some of the growers are using that repellency in California to move the lygus bugs out of the field because of that repellent property. And so it's not easy to test because there's no knockdown, and you don't see death until 7 or even 10 days. So we're looking at plant damage here instead of just insect kill. And so in the early days, when we had a lot of the university scientists testing it, they would hand us back the data and said, oh, it didn't work. And then we would look at the protocol and see that they were looking at it after 48 hours. And we're saying now you have to look at the effects 7 to 10 days. But even then, because of the reproductive effect, you really have to look at what it does in a season-long program. And growers are figuring that out over time. So typically in IPM, you build insects up to a particular threshold, and then you knock them down, an economic injury threshold. Well, with products like this, maybe that's not appropriate anymore, and that we look at them when there's a much earlier stage, an earlier stage when the bugs are out there, to stop the population growth in the early stages. So one of the things that you have to look at when looking at biologicals are the effects of water and a number of other factors, adjuvants and all the things that you use in the field, and tank mixtures and so forth. But here's just by way of an example. of Grandivo at different water levels, and how going higher water is not necessarily better. And because of the mode of action of just washing it off the plant, and the insect is not getting enough of it by feeding to be lethal eventually, you have this lower level of activity at higher water. But so many times you hear that this is the water they use, and therefore we have to live with it. So now we have to look at adjusting the rate and look at the concentration and not just an absolute amount of pounds or kilos per acre. Likewise, the effect on formulation is dramatic. So if you look, this is injury due to armyworm and cabbage looper larvae. And this is a granule this is moving from a wettable powder formulation to our current granule formulation. And you can see that some of the formulations, it's no better than the untreated. But if you look at the granule formulation, which is formulation number 4, it's not statistically different from the very best chemical on the market against these types of pests. And so when developing these products, it is a very big challenge to stabilize this natural chemistry, the microbe plus the natural chemistry, because they're so biodegradable. In this case, the compounds are degraded in a few hours by UV light. So we have to find formulation ingredients that will stabilize those compounds and have them work long enough to do the job. In our case, we also want them to be organically listed, so we can have them be used both by organic farmers and conventional farmers. So finding those inert ingredients as carriers that are organic for organic production is very challenging as well. So it's a great challenge for any formulation chemistry group. So I have lots of data. We have thousands of field trials behind our products. But it's just by way of example, we're so often, university researchers or public researchers will test our products standalone against the best cocktail of chemicals. And then maybe we'll get 70% control with ours and 85% control with the chemical. And then they will stand up at a grower meeting and say, our product didn't work as well as the chemical. Well, that is not the full story. The full story is that farmers mix and match products. They use tank mixes and rotations all the time. They don't use anything standalone. So therefore, the next step is to integrate these into a program. And so more and more, we're looking at what these things do together with each other. And just by way of example, this is against a key pest in almonds in California, navel orangeworm. The growers will get a lower price for each of the nick, or the little damage that causes a white spot on the nut caused by the navel orangeworm. The chemicals only give partial control. The very best chemicals only give partial control of this pest. So the growers are looking for solutions. So they're adding either Grandivo or Venerate, each of our 2 insecticides, to their mixture to improve their performance. But our product in this particular test was just fine standalone, but we're recommending it actually in a program because that's how growers use it. Now we have lots of data showing rotations in every crop, we have every imaginable crop, and as well as tank mixtures, and that's really where it's at. So so often you'll hear biologicals have weaker performance than chemicals, and that is actually not true. And it's just how you look at it and how you test them. So getting to the market and getting in front of farmers, of course, is the key thing when you're a commercial company. And what we found is that there's just about a 3-season adoption cycle. So the first year, the grower, this is a typical grower. There's always early adopters who will use it on the full 500 hectares or 1,000 hectares the first year. But yeah, we have big farms in the U.S. So, but the typical farmer will try a little bit the first, and then a little bit more the second, and then more full adoption the third. So how do we then accelerate this adoption curve? Well, there's a lot of new startups driven by Silicon Valley money that thinks they can disrupt this. But you know, I've not found too many farmers that want to be disrupted. So instead, what we do is we incentivize our team to do more demos. So the more on-farm demos we do, a block of our product incorporated into the program compared to their conventional program will then convince the farmer that the product should be adopted. And so the more demos we do, the faster the adoption. But number one thing they're looking for is performance. Yes, there's all these other soft things I mentioned, and they're not really that soft, but they are important. Resistance management, residue management, and pollinator safety, and more growers are looking at not knocking back their beneficials, and they're looking at soil health. But the number one thing is, does it work? Does it give me more money and better return on investment? So because of that, we have spent a lot of time and energy with our marketing department quantifying the actual dollars and cents of the return on investment to the grower. I'm not going to go through all these examples, but we've done it for each one of our products. And when you look at the increased yield or quality, sometimes it's quality, like in the case of potatoes, where we have a higher grade, a better grade, larger potatoes, they get more money for that. Or in the case of almonds, where you have less damage, so fewer nicks, that's money. And so we can quantify this, and this is really where it's at. The beauty of biopesticides is that you can use them across all production systems. You can use them for organic, and they tend to be used with other organic products. Even then, they're not used standalone. And then there are growers in the same block. I can stand in a field of strawberries, and I can look over there and see the organic block. I can look over there and see where they're using chemicals, but only using chemicals early in the season because they don't want residues, because they're air shipping them to Japan or Europe, so they want to be call them residue-free. And then over here, I can see the conventional block. Interestingly, those growers get $28 a box for the organic, $22 a box for the residue-free, and $12 a box for the conventional. So more and more growers are going to residue-free and planting more organic acres because of the higher return on investment than they're getting. And why are they using our product in the conventional strawberries? Because they don't get good enough control with the conventional tools for lygus bug, which is the worst pest. They're adding our product to the tank to improve performance. This concept of capital light versus capital heavy investment in developing a product is extremely important. Because when a small company like ours goes to market, we don't have $300 million to develop a new product like it would cost for a new chemical pesticide. We have a few $1,000,000. So when we go to market with version 1.0, we've invested, well, let's say $5 million. So we might have 200 field trials behind the product. We know enough to be able to commercialize it with those early adopter growers that will really looking for something to solve their problems. But we don't have 1,000 field trials or 2,000 global field trials like the big chemical companies do. So sometimes there'll be criticism of the biological, but it's kind of misplaced criticism because it's that we don't put it out there before the product's ready. We put it out there when a grower wants it, but it's still in development, and we're still learning about it as time goes along. So we then launch version 1.0, version 2.0, version 3.0. And so our products are in all various stages of version 1.0, 2.0, or 3.0. And you know, just like you have your iPhones are many different versions, or your phones have many different versions of them, this is really no different. And so it shouldn't be that foreign of a concept. But because typically the model in pesticide development is big money up front, then launch big, get to peak sales of hundreds of millions in 3 years, this is a very different business model, which allows small companies like ours to be in business, and our revenue growth will ramp up slower for each product because we're incrementally adding knowledge base to our products. And a lot of those growers love to grab the product as soon as they have it, because they can then they can then shape that product, and they can tell us what they like and don't like about it, and that information feeds back into R&D. And you can do that with a biological because the time for registration in most places except Europe is much shorter. 18 months approval in the US is quite fast. So, and then if you have a new formulation, you can get back through the agency in 7 months. So some key messages. Biopesticides have gotten better over time. So there's so many university researchers in the United States, the land-grant institutions, that won't even look at biopesticides these days, which is surprising because it is the fastest growth area and farmers want to try these things. But because they looked at something 10 years ago and said, these things don't work, today's biologicals are different. And there's an increasing grower receptivity to these products, but the growers have very low awareness of these types of products and certainly need a lot more education. For example, last year I did a survey of California almond and grape growers. More than 50% had low awareness of the category, the entire category of biologicals. So that's not, maybe it's not a surprising number, but 84% had never heard of us and our brands. And that's right in our backyard. So the key here is increasing the awareness and further education, and we're spending a lot of time doing that. I am constantly writing and doing podcasts and videos and such, and so on our webpage in the BioBite section, I have a whole area of knowledge, a whole section on background material and podcasts and such about the whole category, so someone can get up to speed. And I mentioned that the best way to create adoption is through on-farm demonstrations. But before we get there, more public investment is needed in developing holistic programs. So a good case in point is the Florida citrus situation, where the Asian citrus psyllid came in and transmitted HLB, or citrus greening, to the trees. The standard practice was to spray cocktails of chemicals every 5 days throughout the season. And what happened? The insects developed resistance to some of the neonics, and the HLB, citrus greening, was spread to every single tree in Florida, regardless of the spraying. So now there's some growers are taking a step back and saying, well, how are we going to do this? Some growers are going and saying, well, I'm going to just spray antibiotics now. Antibiotics were approved just because there's desperation there. Well, when I'm talking to the big growers there, they're fed up, and what they want is someone to help them integrate all of the tools that they see can help them. They look over there and they'll see there's certain differences in crop variety. Some of the trees are standing, other ones are dead. So what's the difference there? They've tried different soil health and nutritional practices, and they see a difference. They see a difference in the pest management tools they do. But who is actually helping them integrate all the tools together on the farm? So many times I hear this in every single crop, and I hear this around the world as well, that we have lost the IPM, what true IPM means, actually. And so we have to get back to developing a true holistic IPM program. And also when I travel around the world, I'll hear growers say, well, Brazil, for example, they have a breakout of Helicoverpa armigera. And they'll say, I've tried all the chemicals and nothing works, so I think I'll just grab this biological and try it. Well, that is the last time that you should be used. That is not the time to be using a biological. I've tried everything but the kitchen sink, so I think I'll use a biological. Obviously, that dooms them to fail, and sure enough, that grower then will say, oh, I tried a biological and I'm not going to try it again. So over and over again, we have to help growers understand that it's not a good time to be using them as last resort. So where we are today, we have generally a chemical-intensive agriculture where chemicals are the products of choice, and then you dial in where biologicals where you can't use chemicals. That would be like at the last part of the season for residue management, or you need to get back into the field more quickly, and so therefore you need to use a biological. But where growers are going is that they are going to a more sustainable program. And why are they going there? Because consumers and food companies driven by consumers, are demanding it. And so we're going from that chemical intensive ag to a more bio-intensive, or what's now called a sustainable program, where you're using reduced risk products integrated with biologicals. Yes, organic will continue to grow very quickly. It's a consumer choice, but it's still small relative to where the integration of reduced risk chemicals and biologicals are going. And so we will see, and we are seeing, that biologicals can actually be the base of a pest management or plant health crop production program, and to going towards a more bio-intensive IPM and crop production programs. That is the future. And I know it is because I'm in a think tank with a group of large growers and processors, the very biggest ones in California. And we meet every 6 months to try to solve the problems of California agriculture. We don't solve too many of them, but we try. And one of the very big growers who was completely against organic and completely against was completely against biologicals said to me, I think in 5 years you're going to see biologicals being used as the base of the program. So then I knew it was real. Thank you.